Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. This is a space where we seek to create and cultivate healthy conversations between those things we geek out on and the philosophical and theological questions that often arise out of our fandoms. Like, what does it mean to be human? What makes a hero? What makes a villain? How do the stories and narratives we geek out on shape how we live in the world? We are your priest to the geeks. We aren't all ordained, but we see ourselves as mediators at the intersection of geek culture and going deeper in our faith. We don't always have to agree, but we do respect each other, and we see everyone as a beloved child of God. Everyone geeks out on something, so come geek out with us and enjoy the show.
You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Normally on the show, we attempt to keep things as child-friendly as possible, but every now and then we can hit some harder subject matters or may even have some verbal discourses that may not be suitable for younger or more sensitive ears to hear. In this episode, there may be either a discussion on more mature topics or may have strong language, or perhaps both at once. Your discretion is advised.
What can video games teach us about how we treat AI or robots? And what would Paul Tillich have to say about it all? And would he be a good person to play Smash Bros. With? That's a great question, too. Hey, guys, we are Systematic. This is Systematic Geekology. We are the Priest to the Geeks. I'm Joshua Knoll here with two fantastic guests today. We don't usually do just guest episodes, but I was like, man, I need to talk to Taylor Thomas more. It's really how it started, because like we did this panel at Beer Camp, and I was like, she's really cool. And then I got with her, we got some options, we put it on Discord, let you guys vote for what we're going to talk about. And then I was like, wow, AI video game. We also got to bring back Ben Chica for this. You know, my favorite Tillich, well, two of my favorite Tillich experts. I'm like, I got two on here. So I'll be the guy rambling, and these will be the smart people talking. I'm joined with Taylor Thomas and Ben Chica. How's it going, guys?
It's cold.
Yeah, we're Taylor and I are in the same place, and it's like the wind chill of 10 outside or something like that.
Oh God, yeah. Where are y'all at?
Beautiful Boston.
Ooh, yeah. I was talking to my wife yesterday. I have a friend, Brandon Knight, who occasionally listens. So if he listens, shout out to Brandon. He lives up in the Chicago area. And I was talking about how he makes fun of me because it was like 40 degrees here the other day. And I'm like, I want to die. Like, I don't ever want to be out in this. And Brandon's always like, I can't wait for it to be warm enough to start snowing again. And I'm like, I haven't seen snow in years and I'm miserable. I grew up in Florida. So 40 is just still bad and it will always be bad.
Here's my good
I'm a wimp.
Introductory anecdote for the podcasts. When I visited Claremont, California, before I decided I was going to go there for the PhD, my wife and I were walking around seeing the campus. It was like 70 degrees, but drizzling. I wouldn't even say it was raining. People were walking around in like winter parkas as if it was negative 20 and a blizzard. It was ridiculous.
That sounds like me.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I had a similar experience in Clearwater Beach, Florida. I went down there for spring break from Western North Carolina, and it was like 65 degrees. And everyone was like, I'm so sorry. It's so cold on your spring break. And I was like, it is 20 degrees in North Carolina.
That is one thing where I don't feel like a true Floridian anymore, mostly because Florida's gone like crazy. And I'm like, I feel like y'all weren't this crazy when I was there. I was a kid, mind you, so like, I don't know. But I was like, I feel like it wasn't this bad. And then also now when I visit, I'll go to like Orlando or whatever, and it's like 70 because it's the winter. And I'm like, this is great. And everybody else is miserable. And I'm like, yeah, it's been a while. But anyway, I realized I skipped over the important stuff because I'm like, I just enjoy talking to these people. And I'm like, these are like in my mind, y'all are like my friends now because I like to like make myself believe things. And I skipped over the important bits of how like y'all are smart people, but y'all have like credentials for why you're smart people. Did y'all want to kind of like introduce yourselves a little bit better than I did?
Go for it, Ben.
Yeah.
So I'm a senior lecturer of philosophy and religion at Curry College. In relation to today's topic, I'm the president of the North American Paul Tillich Society this year. Taylor was one of our fellows 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
I think it was just last year, like
recent past,
2024.
Yeah. No, you were mentoring a fellow last year. You were the
2023.
Yeah,
2023.
And I wrote a book about video games and Paul Tillich and theology called Playing as Others. So yeah, this is right in my wheelhouse, but it's right in Taylor's wheelhouse too. So.
I got my PhD at Boston University. I currently lecture in philosophy at Boston College. Working on a book, trying to get that thing out. I don't. Publishers need to get back to me. Oh my God, so slow. But I write about ethics. I consider myself more of a philosopher than a theologian, really. But I think I have sort of an expertise in philosophy and religion alike. So
yeah,
that's me. I run my own podcast, Tillich Today.
Yeah, I was gonna say we gotta make sure we plug Tillich Today. I do, especially that last episode. I can't remember who the guest was, but y'all were talking about how like a lot of high academia no longer wants to interact in like regular media like podcasts, and I was like, this is actually really interesting because like I don't live in the high academia world. I'm just like, this is fun to kind of hear as an outsider. I
mean, I am an academic who sometimes gets high.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. No, I feel like I'm the worst at introductions because I'm like, I've talked to both of these people before. I know who they are. Y'all should just know who they are. Come on. But for those listening, Ben has been on an episode before last year when we were doing our religion and fandoms. He talked with us as we went over some of the God of War and Assassin's Creed games. And then at Theology Beer Camp, I was with both of these scholars as we discussed kind of Paul Tillich in video games. And I think we went over a lot of Ben's book. Taylor kind of helped me host because I was like, I don't know Paul Tillich well enough. And then she made me feel more comfortable. So
you nailed it. You did great.
Thank you. But yeah, that was fun. I'm hoping we can have that conversation up on the podcast soon as well. So you might hear these voices multiple times within a short span of time, which would be great. And then it'll encourage you to go to Theology Beer Camp 2025. And I don't know where that is yet, but I'm just going to go ahead and start plugging it now.
It's LA, but 15 miles outside of LA, so not in LA.
Oh, wait, they do have a place already?
No, I'm joking because they said it was in Denver, and then it was like 20 miles away from Denver.
Yeah. They meant you'll use the Denver airport.
Yeah,
possibly.
you'll see Denver from in the skyline.
Yeah. Oh man, good times. But hey, if you're listening and you're on your laptop, please consider rating and reviewing our show on Podchaser or Good Pods. Specifically, those two, they help the show gain recognition and make it easier to find on search engines or something. I don't know. That's what people tell me, and I listen because I'm not smart enough to research on my own. If you're on your phone, though, consider rating, reviewing, or commenting on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Those are like the two biggest apps that people use for podcasts. So making those apps think we're important. Deceiving them helps us. So deceive them. Make them think we're important. And always, we got to thank one of our supporters. Annette Knoll helps sponsor our show. She's my aunt and possibly my favorite aunt. Don't tell anybody. I love you, Annette. If you guys also want your own shout out, though, you can donate as little as $3 a month on Apple Podcasts, Captivate, or Patreon, and we will shout you out as well. So if you like these little shout outs and you want it to be your name, that's how you do that. And now, all of the legwork out of the way, we could talk about AI and video games. Like the reason people are actually here, I suppose. So first, AI is kind of a tricky subject. I think usually when AI shows up in media, it's like Terminator or iRobot. It's like, we made these robots that are super smart, and then they figured out that humans suck, so now they're going to beat us up. Do either of you want to like start off by just kind of discussing like the general conception people have of what AI is as opposed to what AI actually is?
You can lead on that, Ben, and I'll fill in some blanks.
I mean, AI, Terminator would be like artificial general intelligence, which is the dream of Silicon Valley tech bro types, and we're nowhere near that yet. I don't even think theoretically the way they talk about AI, it's like the current state of AI is possible. Like it's a dream that's way off. But AI is just automation of some sort. Like the early pioneers of AI go back to building literal mechanical robots, and now we're having computers take over that role. But in a way, automatons that were at like state fairs and stuff, and they would look ridiculous nowadays. But I mean, automation itself is kind of what started off AI, and now we just use computers to do it. That makes AI a much more broader phenomenon, but even people that work in AI nowadays will remind you if you ask, AI is a broader phenomenon than like ChatGPT and machine learning and language models. So, I mean, that's my initial reminder of like what AI is. It's a lot more than you would think if you're just focused on the pie in the sky tech future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would concur. It's basically, I mean, it's so broad as to be very difficult to even define what precisely constitutes AI in today's world. I mean, you can define it. It's just that like it's so many different things. And it's not typically what people imagine it to be when they think AI, because when they think AI, they think of, Blade Runner, like, well, Blade Runner is not really AI, they're clones, but you know what I mean? Like a kind of technical replicant of a human being that has all the same functioning, but is, hardwire, right?
Yeah.
Like
Data from
something like that. Yeah,
Star
Data
Trek.
from Star Trek, something like that. But it has been said we're not even close to that. We've kind of reached a point where, we've answered whether the Turing test can judge AI. I don't know if you're familiar with the Turing test. Alan Turing, who was one of the pioneers, basically said, we'll know we have AI when we cannot distinguish a conversation with the AI machine from a conversation with a human. Well, now we're reaching a point where, like, yeah, we can have trouble distinguishing between a ChatGPT conversation and a human conversation, but that still, doesn't quite mean that we're getting towards that, artificial general intelligence. So,
yeah. I actually, I think for me, it was all just kind of like, I don't know. I think in my brain, I assumed it was all pre-programmed responses still, even when ChatGPT came on, until I had, actually had a friend. I won't say his name because he's weird about that. But he had showed me, he plugged in, show me an episode of, so I do another podcast with TJ, the Whole Church podcast. And he said, show me an episode where Joshua and TJ on the Whole Church podcast talk about Batman. And it wrote out a script, and I read that and I was like, well, hot damn, that is exactly what both of us would probably say here. Up to the end where TJ's like, yeah, Josh, that's a bad opinion. And I'm like, that's yep, that's exactly how that conversation would have went. And I don't know, for me, that spooked me. Is it still spooky to you guys, or is it only like us who don't really understand it that it's kind of spooky?
I guess I would be more spooked if it didn't so routinely give me very shitty responses. And I also, I mean, it's very good at pattern recognition. You know what I mean? So, and people are, I mean, we follow specific patterns, speech patterns, patterns of ideas, but without an ability to interact with an external environment, it's limited to the data you feed it. So I am spooked by like advances in AI and what that could mean, especially when it comes to like the creation of original video, and like deepfakes and voice replication and stuff. But in terms of like whether ChatGPT is going to be able to replicate, me and my thought process and stuff, I'm feeling a bit better about it these days. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of tend to be stereotypical on both sides, where I'm like, I get spooked by it, but I'm also absolutely the kind of person that's like, what do you mean I can do less things? Less things are great. I'm like Bender, that one episode of Futurama where he's like, if I make clones of myself, we only have to do one half of a thing each. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. I am both sides of the problem. Ben, did you have anything else to add before we move on to Paul Tillich? I think that's another important part of the backdrop of this conversation.
No, I'll just echo what Taylor said, which is it's a mixed bag right now. So for like every amazing trick or like, wow, AI is like here, you can get an absolutely garbage response from, say, a large language model. I tell my students all the time, I know when you use AI to write, but I initially just grade it as if you wrote it, and I've never had AI write anything but F papers when students have tried to pass off AI as their own writing. And it really can't produce, like, if if it was like a history paper and AI can just scrub the internet and spit out a bunch of dates and names and places, like it can write a decent history paper. But I had a student wanted to write in philosophy and pop culture about drive-in theaters. And I was like, okay, that's pop culture. Great. That's a topic you can choose. And then it was just a history of drive-in theaters, and there was like zero philosophy because the AI had a bad time coming up with like novel, creative thoughts. Yeah. They probably also gave it a really bad prompt and thought they could get away with it, and they were super lazy. But yeah, AI can produce as much garbage as good stuff.
Yeah, it's really dependent on the person. I mean, if you're a good prompt engineer, I fancy myself a very good prompt engineer. So if you can like engineer prompts, and if you already know something about the subject and you're a decent writer, yeah, you can use it to streamline certain processes. But if you just come at it with nothing, like with garbage in your head, you're probably going to get garbage in return because you don't know how to evaluate the information or make edits or make, new prompts.
Yeah. Well, to keep myself from just sounding like the foolish guy here who's talking to smart people, I also am starting my master's of legal studies. And one of the things that I found really interesting was there's been a couple times where legit attorneys try to use AI to like write out their argument. And like you read it over and I'm like, how did they not see that this is bad? Like, it's so weird. It's like, I assume they just didn't read it. But then on the other side of things, I run like 7 or 8 podcasts or something that I help like either edit or, whatever. And we do our hosting. This is getting really meta, I guess, but we do our hosting through Captivate, and it offers an AI thing that's like a little bit extra that I tried once. And it's interesting, like it will write where it's like, yeah, that would be a terrible show description. But also it knows better like SEO stuff. So like what people are searching on the internet. So I'm able to do it and then just like keep the stuff that's, obviously targeting search engines and then reword the rest. And, you can make it work if you're working with it, I guess. So yeah, good and bad of AI. There we go. We had that conversation. Let's talk about Paul Tillich, because I think that's the we can't have this discussion about like symbols and art and video games and AI and not, especially with you two, and not talk about Paul Tillich. And, since I had to do so much reading about him last year because I was paranoid, I also feel obligated to talk more about him. So let's talk Paul Tillich. Taylor, since I invited you on originally, do you want to start? And you have the podcast, Tillich Today. Did you want to like start the conversation for those who don't know? Who is Paul Tillich and what is his like contribution to this like symbols as something that participates and that what it points to and all that kind of stuff when it comes to art?
Well, as you can see from the image, Paul Tillich wasn't just a leading intellectual. Paul Tillich was an absolute thirst trap. So let's just put that on the table. I got
another one that I thought was like a really, really good too. I'm like, man, he was a handsome man.
I mean, he got around. No, I mean, Paul Tillich and Ben, honestly, Ben probably does a better job of explaining this aspect of Tillich than I do because I focus on Tillich's existentialism, and Ben is very much into Tillich's theology of culture. But Tillich very much goes out into the trenches of, kind of like mainstream culture and thinks about how theological symbols, theology broadly speaking, how it functions in contemporary society. So he says like, art, music, paintings, all of these things are cultural expressions. He even calls Picasso's Guernica, I think it's the most Protestant painting after 1800 or something like that is the quote, where he's talking about how, the references to violence and the absurdity of that violence captured in the painting say something about these depth dimensions of reality. So he thinks, culture and religion, culture and theology are pretty much inseparable, and that culture says something about, our deepest existential yearnings. And in terms of like signs and symbols, he says, well, signs just point to kind of, like a stop sign says stop, a red light says stop, things like this. Symbols participate in their reality in a unique way. They point beyond themselves, right? So like the American flag, it is a flag that represents a nation, but what is the nation? The nation is a much larger concept that has, different symbols associated, that has a history associated with it, that has, ideals associated with it. And you can think the same thing about, say, the cross or any number of religious symbols. So that's just kind of my like introduction. And then I'll let Ben pick up where I left off.
So would it be appropriate then to just kind of like wrap my head around the analogy you used? I don't need the stop sign to stop. Like, it's not helping me stop in any way. But if I want to be patriotic, the flag actually helps me be patriotic. Is that kind of how maybe you would write that?
I would hope the stop sign helps you stop. It tells you to stop. It's just that the stop sign, like, I'm not going to go to the stop sign and worship the nature of stopping or something like that. Like, I'm not going to have a
concept of stopping.
Like, it's literally, it just means stop. You know what I mean? Whereas, like, the flag, it might indicate that someone is an American, but it can also indicate a number of other things about that person or about the concept of the nation, right? Like, a nation itself is intangible. It's associated with all of these other things.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Ben.
Signs are in some way arbitrary. So, like, we could all come to agree that putting bananas on poles is the sign to stop, and everybody's going to stop when you see a banana on a pole.
I like this.
You can't force symbols. So part of what he means by symbols participating in what they symbolize is that it happens organically. So you can't with art. So with him saying all of these non-religious paintings are actually the most religious paintings, he would say you can't come along and like take a picture of the Last Supper and be like, no, like find this religiously engaging. He's like, no, that's like boring. It's just a picture of 13 dudes. It doesn't really move my spirit, whereas this does. So he would say you that just happens. The symbol participates in what it symbolizes. So like with the flag, let's say after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the flag kind of brought people together and there was kind of a moment of national unity, and the symbol of the flag participates in, oh, there are the stars on it. We all do actually feel together. Maybe during Vietnam, the flag no longer has that power, and you can't force patriotism and say, no, like support the war no matter what. But maybe burning a flag has some symbolic power of we need to like destroy this thing right now and let something else take its place because the nation is not what it should be right now. So the symbols like live and die organically, and you can't force an alternative on them.
Yeah. So I got this is actually kind of ties it into video games, and this is still just helping my brain. So right now I'm wearing a shirt with an image on it, and I in my mind this image tells people one of three things. Either people look at it, don't know what it is, and they're like, wow, that guy's a nerd. Which I think is probably a vast majority of people who see it. I think some people see it and go, okay, he likes Kingdom Hearts, and like it ends there. But then I think there are the people who play Kingdom Hearts and engage it the way that I do, and they see this, image, and they're like, oh wait, that's the image of the heartless and the image of the nobody, which is a heart without a body and then a body without a heart. And this is what it means to be a full developed person. And it actually has like a really deep philosophical meaning that we can engage with. So I think like, so for some people, it's a sign that I'm a nerd. And then I think for some people, maybe it's like a symbol of something more powerful than that we experience in the game. Is that a better way of saying that? Like how would I use this in this conversation? Because I feel like it's both a sign and a symbol depending on who's looking at my shirt.
Sure. I'm okay with that. I think that your way of analyzing your shirt works.
Okay, cool. So I think I'm starting to get the concept here. So Taylor, you also mentioned existentialism. I think both of these kind of have a part in the AI conversation, depending on what people mean by existentialism, because I feel like that word gets used a lot and people don't always know what it means. But when we're thinking about participating in art and it being symbol, like video games, you are quite literally participating in the art, like very literally. But when we get to like me and my brain, you guys know what I'm trying to say, I hope. We get to some of these ideas. I think some of like what AI awakens, or, this kind of technology awakens in a lot of us, is this kind of realization of like a lot of stuff that we've mysticized and said that there's no way we can replicate it. We can replicate it, and it might make that kind of thinking a little bit more enticing for people. Do you think there's a way that kind of like relates to the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The new kind of advent of contemporary AI technologies, I think, has, awakened a sort of existential dread that had gone to bed just a little bit in a lot of different people, particularly when they're thinking about, what does it mean to be a human, and are humans as special as we think they are? I mean, these are classic questions that most AI movies interrogate on some level, with, varying answers given to that question. So, I mean, it is leading to a new interest, I think, in some of these issues and concerns. But it's also, I think, one of the positive things that's coming from AI in some way, in my opinion, is that it's leading people to think, but what is the best life? Because that's an essential existential question, is what would it mean for me to build a life that is genuinely meaningful? And this is something that Tillich talks about as well. So it's not just about the despair or the angst, but about like filling up the content of my finite existence with something that's actually worth my finitude. And I think AI has led us to think more about that and, the society we're building and whether we really want to live in that society. Like, does it look good to live in a world that's just dominated by some of these technologies? So, I mean, that's my initial thought on that.
Do you love systematic ecology as much as I do? Of course you do. So why don't you hop on over to the Systematic Ecology shop and get yourself some merch. We have clothing like hats, extra soft t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies. We even have glassware and mugs. One of my favorite coffee mugs that I use every morning is a coffee mug that has on it, share the faith, share the geek. Yeah, I get my geek on first thing every morning, thinking of systematic ecology. And I know you need to hop over there and get you some merch, represent us out in the wild, out in the public, and let people know that you too like to share the faith and share the geek.
Yeah. I mean, before marrying the concepts, my brain right there even just goes to like with AI, I often think like, hey, most of our jobs could be obsolete if we wanted them to be at this point. But then what does it mean to like for us to have a society where we don't have to work? We would have to completely redo our concept of like money and trade and everything. So that brings up a lot of those kind of thoughts for me. But then also like even in video game world, like when you're thinking about like what's worth our finitude, I'm like, there are those games that I play like Tetris or Candy Crush. I never really got too much into Candy Crush, but you have those games where you're like, I'm literally doing this and I don't know why. And it's like, is that actually worth my time? And then you have these games where like I get great meaning and joy out of it. And it's like, okay. So I feel like, I'm both Andy. Maybe I'm rambling here. Ben, help me out.
Well, I would hope that what I tell people is one thing AI does is I think you should get over the notion that our thinking is completely unlike AI, because like we can't fully explain ourselves all the time either. So like if an AI just comes up with a conclusion, but the nature of AI processing is it can't like report how it came to that conclusion, but it still did a thing. I mean, we do that a lot of times. Like, why did I do that? I don't know. I just did it. People with mental disorders quite literally are incapable of telling you how they came to the conclusions, and they act on like delusions. So is an AI deluded if it says it's self-conscious? I don't really care. It came to a conclusion. People do that a lot. But that should knock us down a peg. And instead of assuming humans are untouchable, we're like even though we know we're biological creatures, I mean, some people still resist that, but we still casually act like we're like obviously so superior, unlike everything else. So if we're not, maybe we actually need to be like, how do we actually want to live? Like, how do we want to use AI rather than just assuming we're this untouchable? Like, we still act like the kind of modern philosophical period, disembodied consciousness. AI can kind of wake us up from that false impression of ourselves and get serious about, maybe we shouldn't just do it because we can do it, and we should get deliberate about how we want to live.
Yeah.
Ben makes a really good point about, we don't always know why we do the things we do. There's actually a ton of research in moral psychology about the fact that most of our moral judgments that we make, we arrive at after the fact. So like we make a decision and then we only in retrospect do we justify it. But we pretend that we reach that decision through logical reasoning as opposed to just, I felt this way, I made this decision, and I acted basically on impulse. So just an interesting point there.
I mean, that very research is what caused me to be paranoid enough that I literally have a notebook that I share. Well, I guess it's a digital notebook I share with my best friend. It's a list of, if this happens, here's how I think I should respond. So that we're able to like ahead of time do it. And then we look back and we're like, am I justifying or did I actually think this was a good idea? Yeah, I'm a paranoid person by nature. Last Kingdom Hearts rant, but like a lot of this also goes to what part of what I love about this game series. It probably got me into philosophy in the first place. Is you have this like concept throughout the games of like, are you still you without your heart? Are you still you without your body? And then even memories jump into this thing. Like without your memories, are you just your memories? Are you more than that? And then at some point, there's actually Kingdom Hearts Recoded, where the digital version of Sora gets created and a heart develops in it. So like it has its own essence, basically. And so that really directly addresses this like question of AI. And it's like, well, if this is such a thing as possible, that we're able to replicate ourselves perfectly, then whatever we mean by heart or soul or whatever, could it also be replicated digitally? And that's one where, since we don't know the makeup of what makes us us, it's kind of hard to say no. But yeah, that's my Kingdom Hearts rant. We're going to jump into, well, do you guys know anything about like the history of AI in video games, like specifically how these two ideas kind of merge or where they interact with one another?
I mean, I know it's a little bit been driven. It's got some same problematic connections that AI outside of video games has, which is a lot of military funding has been a part of AI. So a lot of military funding went into the Call of Duty games and the Battlefield games with like modeling the guns realistically. So they would get like paid by the military would like was interested in using them as recruiting tools in part. So they would help fund, say, artificial intelligence and like the use of weapons in war games. The very first video games came out of military technology. So Tennis for Two was originally played on, I forget the piece of technology, but some ancient military screen. They programmed a game on it. So there's the video games, military, AI, military, like Venn diagram is what I know the most about.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know you've written before on some of that, and even how like Call of Duty and all of these really were kind of predominantly white male, and it wasn't until more recently that they kind of started showing inclusion, and we could get into a lot of the diversity conversations, which is also a big conversation with AI in general right now, because a lot of our models are modeled after specific kinds of people and not other people groups, and how do we show who we're prioritizing through our technology is fascinating. But maybe a different topic. I don't know. Did you guys want to talk about that any, or do you want to just kind of focus back in on the AI stuff?
I mean, I'll say this. If my war propaganda doesn't have a gay in it, I'm not doing it. If I can't do lesbian stuff while I'm killing brown people, I don't want it. That's not an ethical game for me.
That's okay. Yeah, that's the quote of the episode. When you guys look for the Instagram image, it's just
no, it makes me laugh because I think at one point during the past couple of elections, there have been these memes, and it's like it'll have a bomber jet, and it'll say Republican, and it'll just have a bomber jet, and then it'll say Democrat, and it'll have the same picture of the bomber jet with like a gay flag and Black Lives Matter stickers on the side of the bomber. Yeah. So that's how I think of like diversity in Call of Duty. It's just like, oh yeah, like same but diverse. Yeah,
it's beautiful. So that makes sense. I mean, it brings to mind for me like how there's a ton of robotics that exist just because this guy named Walt Disney was like, I bet I could make this. Then he did. And then we had Pirates of the Caribbean ride, which apparently has led to some terrible, scary military things. And that connection is also kind of weird and people don't think about it. But here we are. So we got the AI. It has a lot to do with like military, different kind of like advancing of technologies. Ben, I remember from your paper, and I was rereading a little bit earlier today, one of your papers. You sent me a few, but one of the ones that were actually about AI, because you've written about AI some. I know, Taylor, you've recently spoke about AI in video games. And I want you guys to be able to kind of like do your own riff of like what you guys have been working on your own. But in your paper, Ben, you spoke about some of like the genuine interactions video games encourage us to make. And two of the examples that you had that I really thought were interesting was the games Gone Home and then Papers, Please. Yeah. Did you want to unpack any of that for us, maybe?
Yeah, well, the thing... so the exciting thing about AI, and I guess I'll connect this to your Kingdom Hearts rant.
Yes.
It's the digital heart stuff. I often tell people, depending on who you are, and I've had some people, I speak at a lot of video game conventions, and I've had some players like confirm this to me. Like, depending on who you are, that digital you, the online you, in the video game you. So like, why not think about like an AI you is like more real than the real world you? I think the easiest example to convey what I mean is Gone Home is a game that ultimately has a pro like LGBTQ plus rights message. It centers around this girl in high school, Sam, falling in love with this girl, Lonnie. It's actually changed. There's reporting in the game industry that it's changed explicitly conservative Christians who are against same-sex marriage because of their Christianity to being for same-sex marriage, just because they played the game. But on the other hand, imagine you're gay or lesbian and you're in parts of Africa, parts of the Middle East, where if you came out and were like caught, because that's a thing that you're not allowed to do, you get caught publicly out as gay or lesbian, you can be like put to death that same day, more or less on the spot. So like that virtual you is more you than you're allowed to be in your real life. And that's not just abstract philosophical, like, wow, isn't that weird to think about? No, that's like really important for people's lives, depending on the context that they're in.
Yeah. Taylor, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Ben summarizes it well. I work on a kind of different set of issues where it concerns AI in video games. So I'm more interested in, building moral environments or what a moral virtual environment would look like, and what, for instance, non-playable characters, what sort of qualities would they have to possess, and how could, advances in AI actually make them more dynamic? So I've, written about the game I return to most is Assassin's Creed, because it's such a large environment. It's Assassin's Creed and Red Dead Redemption are the two games I cite the most, because they're huge games. They're open world games, and they have a kind of built-in moral system that, does determine the outcome of the game. So I've thought a lot about moral reasoning and how NPCs, they're able to engage more broadly, can impact player decisions. So like, what if you incorporated, a language model into the game in the way that ChatGPT is? What kind of guardrails would you have to put up? These sorts of things. Though I'll be honest, like, I've been engaging in AI for the last year quite extensively in my research, and I'm contributing to one of Ben's books on AI and Paul Tillich. But I'm like growing more skeptical. So I'm like I literally just ended my ChatGPT subscription this week, because I was like, I hate this. It's unethical. I can't contribute to anything Silicon Valley is doing. Like about the moment that Mark Zuckerberg was like, Facebook is going to be all bots, I was like, okay, fuck this. I'm out. Let me go back to the plow. Yeah. I don't give a shit anymore. Like,
there's I don't know. We need to put a lot of guardrails up for this thing. There are lots of technologies out there that I think, if we didn't choose how we use it more wisely, would have ended a lot worse. Even going back to like fire, like whenever we discovered we could make a fire, that had to be terrifying. And I'm really glad that someone was like, hey, we should use it for these things and not these things. And obviously it has been used for terrible things as well. But,
Tillich helps with this conversation, though, because Tillich talks, and all existentialists do this, but Tillich talks a lot about, ambiguity in the world, and even sort of the tension between, the holy and the demonic, and things that lead to, more creative potential and self-fulfillment, and things that lead to our destruction. And that, within every technology specifically, there's always an ambiguous quality. So like every technology we've ever developed that's changed the world had the capacity to realistically like end the world or distort it in some way. So you can think about nuclear technology. You can think about, how the Industrial Revolution helped, humanity. It also led to like the most brutal wars we've ever seen in our history. Yeah. Even the synthesis of ammonia, right? Like lifted the carrying capacity of the world, and then was used in the Holocaust in gas chambers, the same chemical process. So it's like AI is the same thing.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead. Can I follow up on Taylor? Your ideas on AI and NPCs are really exciting to me, but it's interesting to hear you now, like reflecting on them and kind of simultaneously being over it, because like that's like in stuff that I've written so far, I kind of have to like cherry pick video games that have kind of been designed to deal with the social issue. But if what Taylor talks about, if like the AI, wasn't just working off of an algorithm that a developer explicitly wrote to kind of be about this emotional story, but was actually responding to you, then kind of the stuff that I deliberately focus on, these smaller video games, like lots of people who love video games haven't heard of Gone Home or Papers, Please, even though they both kind of were like had big moments. They're still smaller games within the industry. Mm-hmm. Like that could be unleashed upon the whole industry if what Taylor talks about was adopted more wholesale. But she's like, Taylor, you're also correct that the what's hidden when we just talk about AI is all of the real world costs. So the energy, like climate change, AI is going to make it worse. Not just that we have to use energy, but the materials that need to be extracted to make all of the graphics cards and chips is really damaging the process of getting it. And the people doing it are basically working in slave-like conditions with next to no wages. So all of those human, environmental, like earth and extract, like there's real extraction from things that matter. And then they just show you the shiny AI. So, I mean, it's a problem, but ethics is complex and there's not easy answers. So like I'm simultaneously, I like Taylor's ideas. How many game developers are actually going to would really get on board if they're not philosophers themselves? I don't know, but there is also that real world. Real world. Too.
Well,
no, and if I can follow up on what Ben just said, like part of what did it for me is this fall. So I'm from a region of the world that Hurricane Helene just devastated. My hometown was one of the main towns. But what people don't know is that my hometown is a mining district, and it's not just coal, which is usually what we get out of Appalachia, but it's some of the purest quartz and feldspar and mica in the world, like not just in North America, but in the world. So it's a top extraction site for all of the materials that go into some of these AI technologies, including like fiber optic cables and computer chips and stuff. And right after the flood, I kept seeing all these newspaper stories, and they would say something to the extent of like, how this tiny backwater could impact the tech industry or some stupid thing like that. And it was in the midst of this immense suffering, like people dying because they got washed away in the flood. And especially living in Boston, which is, a big site for the tech industry now, and having connections to like Boston University Computer and Data Science Center, and knowing all these people who think they're going to change the world with AI, and no one's saying shit about, like the literal site where people are suffering and they're poor and they have absolutely nothing because we've systematically stripped them of the agency in order to take their resources. I just, at that point, I was like, you know what? This is bad, like very bad.
Yeah. I actually, so I live and work in like the Charlotte area, but like the South Carolina side. So I was at work, and the day that the hurricane came through, and my boss gets a call. We're not able to open because the power is off, but we still have to be there to cut vegetables in case the power comes on, because, that's, humans are valuable. Anyway, my boss gets a call. It takes off, and it turns out her sister called her from the top of her house with her whole family and her kids' friends over because their house is going down a mountain. And she's trying to drive into a hurricane to find her sister. And then all I see on Facebook the rest of the day is pictures of, hey, that's not really Donald Trump. And I'm like, okay, but like right now I could give two shits if that's really Donald Trump or not. Like this whole, was that AI generated image or not? I don't care right now, That's just me. The non-playable character thing, though, I'm going to do a hard pivot out of this. It does remind me. So part of the advantage of being host is I get to pick my own examples. And it reminds me, and it ties in really well to the conversation I wanted to have around Shadow of Mordor. And I won't get too much into the content because I know you guys have either not played it or not played it much. However, some of the concept is one of the big things I was thinking of as I was reading Paul Tillich and some of this other stuff that I was like, I need to ask them about this. And then I didn't get time on stage to ask you about this. So now I'm asking you now because I found an excuse. It's Taylor talked about. I'm gonna let you go at this first. So what happens in this game that I find interesting for this conversation? The non-playable characters, the bad guys, remember you. So your character comes back to life if they kill you, if you kill them, whatever, that kind of stuff. So they'll remember you, hold a grudge. If they beat you, they go up higher in ranks and they're bragging about it, and you can go get revenge and get extra points. Because they'll remember how you killed them, what happened, and then they learn your fighting style too. So they're able to fight you better, and they get harder and harder to beat the more you lose to them. So they kind of use this little bit of AI in this game. And this is not a new game at this point. So for me, like when everybody's freaking out at CGI, Chat GPT, sorry. I'm like, I fought this thing before. Like, hold up. I've already beat Chat GPT. But, I'm just playing mostly. But like for me, like that's where my brain went, is like this taught me revenge. And man, it was satisfying. Like if I lost to the same thing like 4 times and it kept getting stronger, and it's like, yeah, I killed him 5 different times. Last time I ripped his head off and then laughed about it. And I'm like, well, I'm going to kill that fucker, Then when you do it, it's satisfying. But I don't know, maybe that's like feeding some part of me that I shouldn't be feeding. So I think that's like, because a lot of the AIs, like we're talking about, does it teach us how to treat one another better? Can it teach us how to treat one another worse for things like this? Like, is it making me want vengeance? Is it like how do we talk about this side of the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point. And I think that's where I've come up as sort of I'm not really sure how I feel about it, because I think it's important for us to engage in a variety of different experiences, even if those experiences aren't necessarily good. Like I don't know if you've ever played Cyberpunk 2077. I think that's the name of it. That game, I mean, it's not an example of what you're talking about specifically, but there are certain experiences in the game that like are kind of a draw to people because they're a little bit dirty and risque, and like you can go with prostitutes. But I remember when I was doing the thing in the game, it kind of had the reverse effect where I was like, oh, capitalism is bad. This is dehumanizing. This is terrible, which is what the game is essentially about, as most cyberpunk literature is about, kind of the dehumanizing effects of technology and capitalism. And I imagine that like something like Shadow of Mordor, if done, differently, could have that same effect where like, yes, it causes you, or it promotes a certain type of engagement, but then there's something built into it with these NPCs or characters who can remember you, who can react to you, that sort of follow your trends, your activities in the game. And even if you engage in these more, I guess, unethical, arguably, activities, they do lead to some sort of awareness, or there's something in the game that can at least give you that insight. But I don't know. I mean, Ben might be better at answering this question because he's actually played the game, I think.
I have. I agree with a lot of what you said, Taylor. I think if it was done differently, but I'll start off by saying there is value. So piggybacking on a few things, there is value in different sorts of experiences. And even before video games, there was a theory called the catharsis hypothesis, that playing at violence kind of gets out aggression in a fanciful setting rather than actually hurting somebody. So they were thinking like children in playgrounds, like playing violent games, and then they don't actually hurt each other, but it's play violence. Just think of like, if you've had or just love dogs fight each other, and they're not, if things go well, actually harming each other. Often when there's some terrible news story about a school shooting and the country's once again not going to do anything about it, I will like load up Call of Duty, crank the bass, and just shoot with like thumping bass. And yeah, I'm like recreating the thing that I want this country to like stop, but I'm getting out aggression rather than like yelling at somebody that I care about. So there's that aspect of it. This game in particular, it was the Nemesis system is what it was called, but it was kind of rote. They actually copyrighted it. I believe Warner Brothers published the game, and they copyrighted the system, but they never did anything with it other than in Shadow of Mordor and the sequel Shadow of War. But they never did it, used it in any other games. And even though it was copyrighted, like people can copy ideas and iterate on them, and nobody else in the industry ever did anything with it, because it was kind of like they're learning you, but they're just kind of like you get, they get higher up in the command chain if they kill you several times. They remember that they beat you. If you kill them, somebody takes their place, and it just kind of happens again. So there's like remembering there, but it's got an impersonal face. So it didn't really fully deliver on what it said. It's kind of just like it keeps tally on both sides of like who's killed who. And then in the game, like you can come back and get your revenge. But it wasn't as like truly interactive as they claimed. Like I'd be interested if there was like not that this is going to happen with an orc in the context of, or an uruk in the context of a Lord of the Rings game, but like, could you forgive them? Probably not really a thing that could happen in that interaction. But like, instead of getting revenge, could you be like, you know what? I won't hurt you this time. Let's get over this.
Yeah, and Ben's point reminds me of like a really important bit of information about video game research, which is that like, as much as people fearmonger about video games causing violence, there's no evidence that playing violent video games actually like causes people to go do violence in the real world. But what there is evidence of is that certain video games, like the environment can promote certain, or not promote, but exacerbate pre-existing attitudes. So I'm thinking about like Call of Duty chat rooms, which are known as hotspots for kind of very far right indoctrination or radicalism in some instances. There's a lot of sexism and racism in those chat rooms, as well as like games like Red Dead Redemption, which have an honor system. And so the violence that you commit against, important NPCs, right? There's a difference between like primary NPCs and just like kind of random NPCs that pollute the environment. Like the violence you commit against important NPCs, that plays into your honor code. But the problem is that like, if you're just a random edgelord teenager going into a video game, you have the opportunity to tie up a suffragette and feed her to an alligator. So it's like those little things in the video games that are not like promoting certain attitudes, but that are allowing pre-existing attitudes that are problematic to kind of thrive unchecked, and communities can build up around them.
I do wonder, and this is just speculative, but I wonder how much like more impactful the community around a certain fandom is rather than the fandom itself. I think of like, there's certain fandoms, like you'll say like, I don't like it because of the fandom. And like, sometimes I'm like, yeah, that totally checks out. Like I know people who don't like Star Wars because of Star Wars fans. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'm with you. I love Star Wars. I grew up with it. But like, if I had a choice right now, I'd probably be with you. Supernatural. I love Supernatural. I don't love Supernatural fans for the most part. Like they way over sexualize it. And I'm like, I just kind of wanted to see them fight ghosts, like that's all I'm here for. But yeah. All right. I'm going to move on to another game, because I'm again get to be the GM. The Ratchet and Clank series. One thing that I find really interesting that it does that could add to this conversation a little bit. I know we don't have too much more time, but in the game, you have robots like Clank, it's Ratchet and Clank, who are like part of the good guy team, so to speak. So like they each have their own personality. Like the AI is developed enough that everyone has their own personality and stuff. And yet one of the main bad guys, Dr. Nefarious, wants to turn everyone into robots because robots are superior. And some of it even has like a background of like how he was treated and how clearly organic life form is like shittier than robot life form. And like they're more efficient anyway. So we might as well just make everybody robots. So it's interesting because the game kind of turns it into like not just like an AI good bad question, but also kind of a racism kind of like storyline with it of like, are we being prejudiced against the robots or are they being prejudiced against organic life? And at the heartbeat of all of that is this: how are we actually treating the AI or the robots? And I know that's kind of something we've been talking a little bit about throughout all of this, but like, does something about how we treat our robot friends or the AI or the robot bad guys, like does something about how we treat them impact who we are? Or is like, there's something about this concept of like what Christians talk about, the Imago Dei? Should we still have like whatever we mean by that doctrine? Should we still apply our attitudes towards AI and artificial life maybe?
Do you want to take this first, Ben?
So it made me immediately think of books that I'm reading right now for this project on AI and Paul Tillich that Taylor is contributing a chapter to. So this is from Amy Webb's book, The Big Nine. She's talking about like the 9 tech companies that kind of run all this stuff around the world. And I just finished reading this morning this list of questions that she wishes the AI folks were asking, but they're not. And it just made me think of these 2 questions that she asked in conjunction with the game. Is it okay to build AI that recognizes and responds to human emotion? Under what circumstances could an AI simulate and experience common human emotions? What about pain, loss, and loneliness? Are we okay causing that suffering? Like, if we actually achieve what we want with AI, would we be inflicting suffering and pain upon them if we're asking them to experience certain things about the world? I mean, these are questions about, again, in some way about what we want to be as people and do, less so about like, could we prove if an AI actually experienced pain? But like, what are we doing with the abilities that we have? Is what your question, I think, is really about, more so than could we prove like if the robots in Ratchet and Clank experience racism. It's more a question about us and what we want to do than it is about the tech in a way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. There's a quote by, well, I think it's been rehashed by a lot of people, but I know it from Thomas Merton, actually, where he says our ideas about God say more about us than they do about God. And I think that's true with like how we, as Ben said, how we interact with AI. Like we're going to anthropomorphize, we're going to see agency in the world, and we're going to detect like human-like qualities and things that aren't quite human. That's just kind of what humans do. And so I see it more as a reflection of like how we treat other humans, or how we think we ought to treat people when we see that agency, or we engage with something that has at least the hint of some of that agency. You know, do we call ChatGPT a dumb bitch when it doesn't give us the answer? Or do we say, okay, can you please do this? Thank you so much for that answer. Like, you know, 2 different responses that can say something about how we typically treat humans who could actually feel suffering.
Yeah, it's well, I don't want to get in trouble, so I'm trying to be careful here. Our dog knows the same command by 2 different words. And it's just really funny because you could tell like even how he reacts, like he still does it, but he reacts differently. So the command is either move or excuse me. Right. And like, I know in my head, this dog does not have the concept that, you know, excuse me is more polite, you know, like he doesn't have that concept. And yet he still like, he'll get out of the way. But if it is excuse me, he might move a little bit slower than move. He's getting out of the way, you know. So just interesting, you know, you kind of see that kind of thing. And obviously dogs and AI are very different, but it's telling how these things we amorphize react to us because they were taught by us, by what we value and how we choose to interact with it. And I think that'll just become more and more telling as AI advances, probably.
Well, just to go back to your Ratchet and Clank question, it's like if the game engenders a sense of fairness and justice in you about inequality and like racially, or it just makes you leave the game, you think about other forms of inequality. It's like, that's great. But it's about you, not like, am I actually being racist to like robots in the game? If it makes you leave with those questions, that's more important than answering some like metaphysical question about the status of Clank or something like that. The same thing happens when there's lots of good memes about, gamers are supposedly violent. And then it's like, well, I can't be mean to the NPC in like the quests. It's like, so that's the game impacting you. Like, are you actually being mean to a set of algorithms? Probably not. But the more interesting is like, you're reflecting on yourself and you don't want to be mean to that character. And all of this, sometimes I say, you got to play these games in good faith to have the sort of experiences that we've all been talking about. There are people that just play games to break them or make all of the most evil decisions possible. They're going to leave with totally different experiences. But if you play in good faith, you're generally like, I can't do this mean thing to this character. That's because you're reflecting on the way you would actually act in the real world if this was a character. So it's an impact on you more so than a status about like ontologically what's going on and to the video game digital characters.
Yeah. One of the like hangups in some of my research, I've been trying to figure out, like, does the video game environment cause you to behave differently, or do you just impose what you already believe onto the gaming environment? And from everything I've been able to kind of discern, it's kind of half and half. Some people are influenced by their environment, and some people just kind of impose whatever they already believe on the world. So you can think about this in terms of like, why did these gamers choose to kill this non-playable character and other people chose to spare him or something like that? So I think that's also a problem when you're thinking about what video games can do for people, because for a lot of individuals, they can be very important and enlightening and, you know, fundamentally reshape how they engage in the world. But that kind of has to do with like what your disposition as a person already is in some respects. Like, I think it's incredibly hard for a video game to do the kind of work me and Ben hope that it will do for everybody, even if it does that for some people.
Yeah. So silly remark and then actual response. I just got to point out, like, I don't know what it says about me, but every time I get choices, I play through a game twice and I go all evil and I test the limits of the game once, and then I'll go play it for real afterwards. I just, I want to see how much I can get away with, but that's just me. On the more serious note of this stuff, though, like, I'm probably gonna get myself in trouble with this. I think the same thing's probably true of religion. There's a reason when some people read the Bible, and I don't think that they're trying to be disingenuous when they read the Bible. They read it and they go, clearly God is holy and he wants justice and fuck everybody. Predestination is right. You're probably destined to go to hell. And then you have the same book someone else will read and be like, wow, God is all loving. He's all about freedom. And it's like, I don't think either of those things aren't there. You know what I mean? Like, even if you're going outside the Bible to tradition, like, I don't think anything in the church alone will say that either of those are technically wrong. And yet, I feel like as a human, one of those seems wrong, but that's because I'm me and not somebody else. I could have been, my brother, for example, is one of those like holiness Reformation people that I think have terrible theology. I don't think that I can say he's wrong because of tradition or the Bible. I have to say he's wrong because of some other thing that I'm pointing to. I think we just put that stuff in God and the Bible and stuff because that's what we bring with us to it. And probably same thing true with video game and AI is kind of sounds what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't love moral foundations theory. There's a lot of problems with it, but this is one of the things they point out is in moral foundations theory is that like morality for most people is about more than just justice and fairness. It can be about loyalty. It can be about purity. Like there are all these things we associate with morality that come down to individual variations in what you prioritize or what you think of when you think of morality and ethics. And so, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get to wrap up and stuff, did either of you guys have anything else you wanted to say as far as like what you think might be the future of AI in games, or what Paul Tillich might have to say about our conversation today? anything else that we might have missed out on this conversation?
I just want to say that Paul Tillich would be the first person to go into Cyberpunk and hit a strip club. That's just my last word.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, she's not wrong. From my understanding, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm a project I'm working on is kind of on the darker side of the industry right now, and plus it's had a rough couple of years because there have been hundreds of thousands of layoffs in the industry. I think some of that human cost is going to get worse before it gets better because a couple of the biggest games in the industry this year. So maybe, I guess from where I'm at, maybe this is a good place to leave it today, is the reminder of the human factor and the costs to it. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big college football fan, and they released College Football 25 this year after it had been gone for a decade. They had AI make all of the stadiums in the game and almost all of the rosters except for the biggest teams. because they said a human wouldn't have been able to do all this. And the game was a top seller, and most players, I'm sure, are not aware of the fact that that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they got away with it and it sold well, and I think people aren't aware that use of AI to make parts of games and at the cost of jobs in the industry, I think is going to get worse before it gets better, because some of the big games this year did it, sold well. I think most people, if you asked, would say they don't want that, but at the same time, I don't think a lot of them are aware that it was done in the games. So I think that's something to be worried about. But conversely, video game voice actors just went on strike this year over AI, and they won and signed an agreement with the biggest developers that if their voices are going to be, if an AI is going to be trained on their voices, they're going to have to sign an agreement with them. So they're not necessarily against it, but like they as artists have to have agency over the process rather than it just being done behind the scenes. So there's that possible direction it could take as well. But it's genuinely up in the air at the moment. Those are like two examples of which like fork in the road are we going to go down.
Yeah, a lot of problems with AI that we think of as being so novel are not novel at all. They're just problems with capitalism. Like it's just stuff we've rehashed in terms of workers' rights for a century.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think my last note on AI in general is I don't mind where it's going. I think we just have to catch up with the rest of our society. I think our churches, religious and other kind of communities like that have done a really bad job at teaching people there's value in work other than just money. And I simultaneously think that we don't live in a society that would be willing to give up capitalism. If we were, the idea that we wouldn't need jobs but could work if you wanted to, and AI just kind of supplements all the things we don't want to do, that could be great. I just don't think our society could handle that because we've not taught ourselves how to be very human, actually. And
that's literally what a Marxist utopia would look like. So
here we go.
I mean, if maybe if some of the thought leaders, the big thought leaders who are doing all this shit would just get a clue about half of the stuff they think and talk about, that would be great. Looking at you, Jenga tower. God. Oh
man. And with that really positive note, we're going to jump into our wrap up today. Oh man. So I know, Ben, you have to leave here in a second. Taylor, could you stay behind a couple minutes after the show for a bonus question? If so, all right, great. Taylor and I are going to answer whether we would rather have the perfect AI companion or the perfect AI counter in our lives to challenge us. So if you guys want to know our answer to that, hang on after the show, go to Patreon, something like that. For now, we're going to do recommendations. Usually I do something like geeky and fun. Today, I'm going to do something a little bit different. A more conservative theologian. I don't endorse everything, obviously. I kind of tend to border the line sometimes on where I'm at on multiple things. But Skye Jethani wrote a book a long time ago that I'm just now getting around to reading. The Divine Commodity. He's really criticizing the American or modern concept of capitalism. And since that's how our conversation went today, I feel like that might be a good book for people to pick up. It's interesting, to say the least. So I think people should maybe check it out if you're open to more conservative ideas that aren't, crazy. If conservative theology in general is scarring to you, avoid it. Because, some people have, I don't know, it's like spiritual PTSD. And I get it. Ben, did you have any recommendations for everybody today?
So I'll stick on topic and say the human aspect of AI, that our conversation went in that direction. Kate Crawford's book, Atlas of AI, is the Atlas aspect is like a map of all of the things being extracted from actual human lives to create AI, and it's a pretty quick read. So I would recommend Kate Crawford's book, Atlas of AI, if the real environmental human costs of AI was interesting to folks.
I might have to pick that one up. Taylor, any recommendations for those listening today?
I'm going to say that people take a turn and say, don't read the books. Read Ben's recommendation. Read other recommendations, but go read Just Debt by Graeber. I mean, he's a political anarchist, but he talks a lot about, how we kind of fucked up our society and the way that we structure it. And I think when we're talking about issues of AI, we're really talking about, political issues, social issues, not so much issues with the technology. So I think if more people had that foundation in some of, these books like Just That, that would be great. My community wouldn't be so poor.
Man, that's a good one. Man, great recommendations today. This was fun. This was intellectually challenging. So I'm gonna have to think about this a little while after this. But guys, if you're on a laptop and you're listening, please check out, rate, review our show on Podchaser or Good Pods. Those two especially help with the search engine stuff for some reason. On your phone, Apple Podcast, Spotify, that's the way. Rate, review, comment there. Helps the show a lot. Seriously, it helps more than you think. More than money, usually. But with that said, I do have to thank once more. Thank you again, Annette Knoll, for sponsoring our show. If you guys want your own shout out, again, $3 a month, Apple Podcasts, Patreon, or Captivate will do it. And we appreciate everybody who supports the show. We only do one shout out an episode, but we appreciate you all. You all rock. Remember, everybody, we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
Make sure you follow us on Instagram, catch us live at events we are holding or attending, get updates when we post new episodes of the podcast, see our other favorite content that we lift up and support, as well as just see our beautiful faces and engage with us through messages. Maybe watch a reel and give us the feedback of what you think of the show.
Hey guys, Christian here to talk to you about the AMP Network. That is the Anazao Ministries Podcasting Network. That's what we do for all of us here together. You can follow the whole network in a single feed on Spotify at Anazao Ministries Podcast or on the network page on Apple Podcasts to just see what we're all doing. And what are we doing? Well, we have plenty of things here. We've got the homily. You love Pastor Will? You want to hear Pastor Will preach? You hear the man doing a homily there? It's amazing. The man does spectacular work for Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Then we have the Whole Church podcast. If you want to hear Joshua and TJ talk to different people from around the church who have very different views on how things should go, check it out there. You want to go to My Seminary Life? You want to get some more Brandon Knight in your life? Who doesn't want more of that? Go there, hear about the man, discuss his time at seminary, which is what he used to do. Now he's on other topics, and just head out there for what the rest of the man can do. Hear a lot of good stuff that way. Now you can head over to Let Nothing Move You. That's my podcast where I go through the Bible chapter by chapter, verse by verse. I started with Luke, then I went to Romans. Now I'm in Genesis, and I'm moving on from there. It's a good time if you want to hear how I view the Bible, how things should go there. You can do that. You can go to Dummy for Theology, where you can hear Joshua Knoll discuss the various theological topics that he has there in an attempt to show every side of the big discussions, leaving you with more questions and answers. If that infuriates you like me, but you still want to listen, head out that way. You can go to the Bible After Hours. We have the foul-mouthed preacher there, and he's going to deliver things that not ready for every ear to hear, but sometimes you need someone to be a little filthy out there just to give a more progressive view of the church, to challenge the status quo of what is happening here. Do you agree with him? Do you not like him? How are you going to know if you don't listen to him? And finally, we have say best for last, the Clydes, Taylor and Elizabeth Clyde. You need some more pangalangin in your life, like all of us do, then head out there, see what's going on in their own life, in their own ministry, so you can hear the devotions and everything going on in their lives. Once again, that's the Anazao Ministries Podcasting Network, AMP, and we love you guys. See you next time.